All right. Good morning, Doug. We're back to discuss a couple of news items from this last week. But first, what happened today in history, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica?
All right, I'm not looking at the encyclopedia right now, but one was that this is the anniversary of Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay having conquered Mount Everest. And it was hard in those days to do that. But now people just pay a lot of money for a real steep and unpleasant walk up with hundreds of other people. I'm sure everybody's seen that picture. Do you happen to have that there in
Yeah,
front of
let
you?
me actually bring it up here real quick. So it's not the best one, but it does make the case. I don't know if you can see that, Doug. There's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
long
right,
line of people.
right. That's what it's like going to Mount Everest. It's like going to a train station or something right now. And those people have to, should they leave any biological waste up there while they're climbing, they have to pack it back down. And look at that line. It's just incredible. It's an artificial adventure.
100%. And it's really strange. It's almost like for the super type A personalities, it's still this sign of like accomplishment, as if it was when Sir Edmund Hillary did it. But it's nothing of the sort. I mean, it just takes, you have to have a lot of money and you have to have a lot of free time and you have to be moderately fit, but not apparently that fit, not compared to certainly what Hillary had to be. And it's just like this bucket list item for the uber rich, I think.
Yeah, com completely pointless, actually. So, I mean, Hillary and Norgay really nobody having been there before. Well, there was an expedition 15 years prior to that by World War II by a couple chaps that I think they found their body. But I guess adventure ain't what it used to be. I mean, it was spectacular when those guys did it. They didn't have all the modern clothing, and nobody's going to rescue them but the oxygen. Yeah, it's hard to perform physical tasks when you're above 15,000 and Everest is over 29,000. So
And if you
anyway,
get unwell, you're not going to have this super Sherpa just put you on his back and carry you down.
yeah, anyway, that happened. That happened today. And the other thing that happened today was JFK was born.
Hmm.
So just another president, I guess.
Yeah,
Anyway,
there was also Noriega's death, was it that today?
oh yes, when the US invaded Panama, which was, I mean, it really is quite bold. This is a supposedly independent country. And because the president was accused of being a drug dealer, he went from being the BFF of the US government to they launched an attack against him. And how many people know, they never really pinpoint the number of Panamanians that were killed in that invasion, but it was a couple thousand, I understand.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I remember. I know what. Listen, when did they invade Panama? What year was that?
was it 1993?
Was it? Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Geez.
so he was hiding in some embassy, perhaps it was the Vatican's embassy, and the US played at ultra high sound levels round the clock, uh, rather discordant music to make him come out. That was because they weren't going to invade some other country's embassy. So
Well, now I don't think they would have that restriction. It seems like those things are no longer. It's amazing that was a sacred thing then. They wouldn't do that, but I don't think anything would restrain them at this stage.
I don't think so. No, we're masters of the universe. So anyway, that's the other thing that happened today.
Okay.
But the US has a long history of invading nearby countries. I mean, it probably started with Mexico during the Mexican-American War. That's how we get in the Marine Corps hymn, the Halls of Montezuma. I think that was our first actual invasion of a foreign country per se.
Hmm.
And since then, US troops have invaded Haiti several times. A lot of good it did, looking at the state of Haiti. And lots of Central American countries, which Smedley Butler, who used to be the commandant of the Marine Corps, was very unhappy about once he realized what a fool he was being played for.
Yeah, I read a biography about him last year, and I read War is a Racket, which is the book that he wrote, more of a pamphlet, really, pretty short. But his biography, it was actually shocking how many places this guy was deployed. I mean, all over the Pacific, definitely all over Central America, Mexico. I mean, everywhere. It took him a while to figure out it was a racket, but when he did,
Yeah.
he knew.
Yeah, it took him a while to figure out that he was actually being used as a hired killer to enforce the interests of U.S. corporations in foreign lands. And he was a pretty wild guy. He won not just one, but I think he won two Medals of Honor,
Hmm.
if I'm not mistaken. That's almost unprecedented.
Hmm.
And it wasn't because he was sucking up to anybody. Wouldn't have been that kind of person.
No, let me just check. Just looking up his medals real quick. Whoa. Yeah, he got two. He got his first one. Oh, yeah, he was in China too. Yeah, he was part of this invasion in 1910 China, where there was, I believe there were like 8 countries all involved at the same time, basically all of the European world, more or less, all involved together in invading China in 1901.
Yes. And there was a popular book, I think it was called 99 Days in Peking. And they made a movie out of it too, which portrayed the boxers as being bad guys. Well, even in one of my favorite movies and books, The Sand Pebbles, that movie starring Steve McQueen, I mean, the Chinese were portrayed as bad guys. But wait a minute, they were trying to get rid of these foreign armies that were lording it over in their land. So, you know, it's just our version of history.
Yeah, and his second Medal of Honor came 13 years later in Mexico, in Veracruz.
Well, I'll have to look that up and see what the narrative, because they always attach a narrative of why it was presented to him. So I'm sure he did something rather spectacular. Anyway, not the biggest day in the world for news, but I have with me here 3 magazines. A Scientific American from December of last year, and also a London Review of Books and a New York Review of Books. And why am I bringing these things up at this moment? Because this is first of all, they should no longer call it the Scientific American. They should call it the somewhat
Scientism.
yeah, scientism American as opposed to Scientific American. It's not what it used to be. It's like everything else in the publishing world, it's been politicized. And so just out of interest, I thought I'd take a look at who's running the Scientific American today. And of the board of advisors, it's about 20 people. More than half of them are women. Well, okay, look, Marie Curie proved that women can do science just as well as men, but the publication's been taken over by the gentler sex, if you would. But it's not just their board of advisors, which are mostly women. The editor-in-chief is a woman. The managing editor is a woman. The copy director is a woman. And you go down the list, and most of the other people are women. And the president of the corporation that owns or runs Scientific American is also a woman. Nothing against women, but it's part of the feminist, all of society is being feminized these days.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows in the Scientific American. But this one, the December issue, was actually quite interesting because the whole issue, the central theme of the issue was basically nuclear weapons. And they had some interesting articles in it this time. The new nuclear age is the theme of this issue. And I find it kind of disturbing that they'd have this issue on nuclear weapons. And some of the articles are actually quite interesting about how the hydrogen bomb is made with plutonium pits and how often they have to be replaced so that they don't auto-combust or whatever plutonium does when it's exposed to the elements for long enough. That's all quite interesting. But one article in here is called Sacrifice Zones. And basically, we have 1,000 Minuteman missiles that are placed around the heartland, places like Kansas and Iowa and Nebraska, 1,000 of them. And they're trying to figure out what to do with these old missiles at this point. And one of the things it talks about at some length is if we got into a nuclear war, what would happen to the continental United States? And they have several pages of, under certain circumstances, where the fallout would go from, the dozens, hundreds, perhaps, of nuclear bombs that would basically pepper the US, where the fallout's going to go, how serious the fallout's going to be, how many people are going to die in the local area from blast. And well, at a time when we're once again on the edge of a nuclear war, I think it's just kind of interesting that they're basically telling people where they shouldn't be if they're afraid of nuclear war. So,
What are the sacrifice zones exactly?
well, basically around the Minuteman missile silos, because one of the theories that the government is looking at is that we have these things in the heartland because they can absorb a lot of Chinese and Russian bombs. They'll go there as opposed to in the cities. And of course, this brings up the question of, isn't that just mass murder when you kill a city? It's not like in the 19th century anyway. It was army against army, and the civilian population were, well, there was often collateral damage, but it wasn't a question of wiping out, obliterating cities. So anyway, one of the arguments they're making for why we should upgrade the Minutemen, who are getting long in the tooth, 50-year-old missiles, in other words. I mean, that's pretty old for a missile to be just sitting in a silo. I think that things would start degrading after a time.
Right.
Okay, so if you believe in global thermonuclear war, you probably want to upgrade the Minuteman with Sentinel missiles. But one of the arguments for doing it is we want to make sure if the Russians attack us or Chinese, whoever it is, that this part of the country will absorb that first attack because they want to take out the American ability to counterattack. So they've got to take out the missiles. But hey, that's good. That's good because that's 1,000 nuclear explosions that won't go to New York and LA and other places like that. They'll go into the heartland. So this is thinking the unthinkable kind of stuff.
And not surprising that they'd have that point of view at all.
No, not at all. No, it's so
Flyover country.
yeah, it's just flyover country. Who gives a damn what happens there? So that's why Kansas exists, Nebraska exists to absorb the counter-strike. All right, then, of course, I have a subscription to the New York Review of Books. And I was reading this and I said, well, wait a minute. Have women taken over the world? I hate to sound like a skit on the Greg Gutfeld show, where after he says something that's politically incorrect, they have a voice saying, a sexist would say, after Greg says something inappropriate. But so I took a look. Who's running the New York Review of Books? And this is a magazine for American intellectuals to talk to other American intellectuals about being intellectuals. And they're mostly
with a huge leftist bent, right? This has been forever.
The leftist bent is unbelievable. And is there a correlation to the fact that both the executive editor and the managing editor, the three most important positions at the New York Review of Books, in addition to the publisher, another important person, they're all females and they're all ultra lefties too. And there were a few articles here that just to illustrate, yes, I know. She's My Russian nurse is up here right now. Maybe she resents my talking the way I am about females. Okay, so let me just quote a couple of things because I don't know how many people are reading the New York Review of Books these days, but I do. They still have interesting articles sometimes, but it's always with a leftist tilt whenever possible. For instance, oh, in this article, they're talking about how bad, how evil tax havens are and why they ought to be put out of business, and how they take capital from the US government and leave it in the hands of the people that are in it, blah, blah, blah. So one thing that's interesting in this article is that they mentioned in 2016, someone anonymously sent reporters 2.6 tar. This is highly unprofessional, wouldn't you say? Oh,
It's a protest vote.
yeah, go play with your sister, lovey-dovey, please. So anyway, it says in 2016, someone anonymously sent reporters 2.6 terabytes of records from a Panamanian law firm that specialized in setting up offshore companies for people. And it mentions many politicians had close relatives with offshore accounts, including Chinese President Xi Jinping's brother-in-law, the British Prime Minister David Cameron's father, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan's son, and the Russian cellist Sergei Radolgin, godfather to Vladimir Putin's eldest daughter, was for some reason, for some mysterious non-cello related reason, was managing $2 billion. So they mentioned these people. Well, we're talking about how many 2.6 thousand terabytes? What was the number I said? 2.6 terabytes of letters. But the one person that they don't mention in this article was the hero of the day, who's
Zelensky.
that runs the Ukraine.
Zelensky,
right. It didn't mention him there. That would be inappropriate because apparently it was disclosed at some point that law firm in Panama, Zelensky had about $500 million, or was it? Yes, $500 million. So they don't want to mention him with Putin. Obviously, well, of course, the question is, what's Putin's daughter-in-law doing with $2 billion under management? She's a cello player.
I mean, that's shocking. And it's also, but all the people they mention are current enemies of the state, right? So you got Xi, related people. Cameron was a conservative prime minister, I believe, in the UK, wasn't he?
Was he a Tory? Well, was he the one that, no, that was Tony Blair that replaced. Anyway, they probably perceive him as a bad guy, but they don't mention that Zelensky was disclosed as having $500 million there. So how did he get that and who gave it to him? Okay, they don't mention that. But they're very anti anything to do with capitalism here. They mention histories of capitalist thought often make much of Milton Friedman. It's kind of a snarky way of saying it, getting into the fact that they don't like him. And they're whining here about the fact that Milton Friedman thought that Hong Kong was a great place. And the way this is written, it goes on about this, that Milton Friedman insisted from the 1950s onward that economic and political freedoms were linked. Now, that sounds terrible. But, so they're like digging this up that actually Milton Friedman believed that. So anyway, tax havens ought to be abolished and so forth. Now, what else do we have here? Oh.
Well, one thing, Doug, I always liked about if I remember right, years ago, you told me about the New York Review book. So I subscribed for a few years, and and it was interesting to say the least, but there were often really strange personal ads in the back of it.
You're right. And not as many as there used to be before the internet, but yeah.
It was really unusual. They were very strange, I thought.
Well, as I tried to illustrate by looking at who's on their board of advisors and their central committee, it's a fag, hag, rag. Anyway, the final paragraph in this article is, it's hard to know in a zone-riddled world how problems requiring coordination and shared sacrifice could be solved. Unfortunately, and they always, this is in every one of these publications every time. Unfortunately, with climate change and a global pandemic, we are not short on such problems. And it goes on to say, capitalism no longer dreams of a unified world. And these people, they love the idea of climate change. They're constantly harping on it. Well, anyway, I find it amusing just going through these articles and seeing that, even though this is basically intellectuals talking to other intellectuals about being intellectuals and women talking to other women about being women. That's what most of this stuff is. But, and of course, one of the featured articles in this is The Earth Transformed, An Untold History. Now, it looks like a very interesting book. I'm not going to buy it because it's 695 pages on climate. And it looks like a reasonably even-handed book talking about how climate has affected history through the ages. But about as close to it as I'm probably going to get is their concluding paragraph, okay? And he says, should our opinion of the Soviet Union change now that we know that its collapse resulted in an enormous reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions? That's a reason to like the Soviet Union. Look, that's what he's saying, or she's saying in this article, is the Soviet Union, should we change our opinion of the Soviet Union because its collapse? It's not that it increased the measure of freedom in the world. It's that when it collapsed, there were less greenhouse gas emissions. So that's why it was a good thing. Under what circumstances would it be forgivable in light of the significant drop in global temperatures caused by the eruption of Mount Tambora? And he goes on, what we really need now is a good volcano, because they found that when Tambora exploded in 1815 in Indonesia, that the amount of emissions we can tell from glaciers where the ice is preserved. So
That was the year without a summer, wasn't it?
yes, exactly. It was perhaps the largest volcanic eruption in recorded history. Took place in 1815. And so the question she asks at the end of this article is, was it a good thing because it reduced the amount of lead smelting? So do we need another Mount Tambora eruption to tighten things up a little bit? Anyway.
These people hate people. They really
They hate
want things to fall apart and destroy.
Yep, they totally do. So I also have a copy here of this is just what I grabbed when I was leaving the US to come down here, because I get these things shipped to me in the US. So the London Review of Books, their editor, they have two editors. Their top editors are two women, Jean Nicol and Alice Sprawls. Their publisher is another woman. So, God, I feel terrible harping on women.
Well, what is it? What do you think it means that? What do you think it means that women have taken, center stage or control of a lot of? I mean, not just publications certainly, but it's more beyond that. Institutions, educational institutions, for instance. What does it mean?
Well, and corporations too, because when we were talking about the managements of the three major U.S. auto manufacturers, GM, Ford, and Stellantis, it's a stupid name for a car company because nobody can even remember it, that their boards of directors were all full of women too. All right, listen, maybe they're competent people, but women are not generally car guys, well, or car people, you might say. So is it optimal to have a bunch of women on a car company's board when they're obviously not car enthusiasts? I think it's a bad idea. It's just like if you have a bunch of men on the board of Estee Lauder.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Of course, those are all gay men, so maybe that doesn't count. So anyway, one of the major article in here that caught my attention is called Inside the Sausage Factory, where the author, who's a woman, of course, is talking about what it was like going to COP26, which was held in Dubai, I guess. I'm pulling this out of my memory banks. I've got a few things underlined in here. So she's talking about the kind of people that she met at COP. And there were thousands of people that went there to blather about what a serious problem the climate and so I give you an idea. It's just I'd just been to visit Bale House in Tradeston in London, uh, a former asylum seekers hostel under occupation by activists in the anti-hydrogen sulfide movement. I didn't know that there was a particular anti-hydrogen sulfide movement out there too. But all right, so she says she's staying at a hotel which was a former asylum for a former hotel for asylum seekers, but it's now under occupation by other people. And she's talking about walking down the street with some Swedish climate theorist and author of How to Blow Up a Pipeline. And the author of this book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, the Swedish guy, says, it's time, I said, for climate campaigners to move out from XR-type theatrics to disciplined sabotage of fossil fuel infrastructure. Well, this is a literary magazine, and they're talking about the kind of people that, I mean, this is crazy. I mean, this is what goes on at these COP things. You know, what does COP stand for? She defines that someplace around here. Here's something that I've just made a little note about. It's talking about Mia Motley, woman. God, I can get into such, I'm not saying any good things about women. Mia Motley, the forceful prime minister of the brand new Republic of Barbados, okay? And he goes on to say that her mention of Bob Marley having brought down the House at the UN General Assembly in September to draw a parallel between the $25 trillion that central banks should have spent on climate, but didn't. Wait a minute. $25 trillion on climate? Where's all that money going to go?
To buy EV charging stations. We can get to that in a minute.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a perfect example. So why don't you mention what that's all about?
Yeah. Well, so this is actually, let me show this. Some of you may have seen Mayor Pete was on Face the Nation on Sunday. And let me just share this real quick. There's he gets a little pushback, which is nice at least.
Says only 7 or 8 charging stations. The Federal Highway Administration says only 7 or 8 charging stations have been produced with a $7.5 billion investment that taxpayers made back in 2021. Why isn't that happening more quickly?
So the president's goal is to have 500,000 chargers up by the end of this decade. Now, in order to do a charger, it's more than just plunking a small device into the ground. There's utility work, and this is also really a new category of federal investment. But we've been working with each of the 50 states. Every one of them is getting formula dollars to do this work, engaging them. And the first handful, again, by 2030, 500,000 chargers. And the very first handful of chargers are now already being physically built.
The Federal Highway Administration says only 7 or 8 charging stations have been produced with a $7.5 billion investment.
Yeah, so that's where it would take, you think, 25 trillion to usher in a green economy at that rate.
And what has Elon Musk's company done in just a short period of time?
They have more than 50,000 and they spent 1.1 billion on them.
Okay, that's an interesting comparison. 7 billion for the government to put up 7 or 8 charging stations. And Musk, whose company was actually on the ragged edge of bankruptcy for years, has still managed to put up 50,000 of them in a short period of time. So where'd all the money go? Maybe a lot of it went down to Panama to join the money from Xi and Putin and Zelensky.
It does seem like there's some big rift in here, just like everything else at this stage.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all about theft. I mean, pad your wallet with as much stolen money as you can before civilization collapses.
And which they want it to do because it'd be good for the environment and people are loathsome.
Exactly. Like that other article I just read where they're asking, wouldn't it be good if we had another Mount Tambora? You know, talk about
I mean,
climate.
it caused a lot of it caused famine in a lot of the parts of the world.
Yeah,
Right?
but there'll be less smelting and less pollution. So you got to look at the bright side.
And people are carbon emitters also. That's not really good.
Got to get rid of all those cows and sheep in the fields too.
Right.
And chickens will be the next to go, I guess, because they got infected with bird flu, I understand.
That's right. And it's ramping up. It seems like it's hard to believe for me that they're actually going to be able to, they actually are ballsy enough or stupid enough to try and pull this off. And maybe people are dumb enough that they'll go along with it after all the COVID stuff. You know, we had since 2020, there's been hundreds of thousands of chickens that have been culled, as you know, allegedly through PCR testing had the bird flu. And so they had to cull them. And then recently it transitioned so that now bird flu has somehow infected dairy cattle. And so they supposedly have some samples that they found that in pasteurized milk, but it's deactivated, so it's fine, but raw milk might be dangerous. And they say so far in beef that's cooked medium or medium well, they haven't detected any virus yet. So they're leaving this suspicion that it's in the meat supply, the things you need, you know? And it seems like they're pushing for it.
Yeah, it does. They want to create another mass mania, another mass hysteria. And nobody talks about the fact, which can't be emphasized enough. I mean, everybody's afraid of getting some type of flu, bird flu, swine flu, Wu flu, whatever. But for as far back as we kept numbers, there have been 30 to 50,000 Americans that die every year of the flu. So it's just part of life, okay? And the way to solve the problem is not by injecting everybody, it's by having a higher standard of living so that you can afford to keep your house clean, eat proper food, be well nourished, let your immune system work. But you can't wipe out a virus because the thing about viruses is they go viral.
And they mutate.
And
right.
they mutate. So this is just more stupidity for control.
Well, I think it's worse than stupidity though, Doug, especially in light of the things you just talked about in these intellectual publications, where there are zones that are worthy of sacrifice and that there are good consequences about civilizations collapsing and, huge natural disasters. They see these things as good. So I don't think it's benign.
No, it's not. These people actually hate other people and they hate themselves too. So, and they're in control of just about everything.
Yeah.
Academia, the media, the entertainment business, politics, obviously, the Congress. They're everywhere. Tech. Yeah, it looks pretty hopeless at the moment. Oh, well, listen, what was it?
There's a white knight who may come to our rescue.
Yeah, right. Is the Libertarian Party going to come to the so-called party of principle? So they elected this person. What's that person's name?
Chase Oliver.
Chase Oliver. Well, he's done nothing that I can find in his life that would distinguish him. He's an activist. That's just somebody that runs around, screams and shouts with his hair on fire. But he's devoid of any accomplishments. And the main thing that distinguishes him is that he's openly gay. I've got no problem with anybody being gay, and I've had a lot of gay friends. I mean, that's a disclaimer which doesn't cut any water anymore. I mean,
yeah, it doesn't.
It's like, but the fact is, I mean, and I kind of like gays in the neighborhood because they are, neat and clean with the garden and they decorate well. And when they put on parties, they serve great food and it's always very polite. So I have nothing against gays, but if you want to run a political party and get people to come over to your side, the average American is not gay. I mean, we tolerate them and it's fine. No problem with gays. But do we really need a gay presidential candidate? Because they're a tiny portion of the population, in point of fact.
Well, yeah, and it's funny we're talking about this guy right after Mayor Pete because he's also gay, and adopted 2 kids. He's raising with his partner and took his first 2 months of office off on paternity leave. But this guy also, Chase Oliver, like I have this clip of him being like fine with drag queen story hour and thinking there's no problem. It's an artistic expression.
Well,
why wouldn't you want your kids to go to it?
Yeah, it's okay if adults want to do that type of thing. It's fine. I mean, absolutely don't illegalize having, dressing up like a woman and playing pretend that you're a woman. Okay, that's fine. I mean, but it's not fine to have single-sex couples adopt a normal kid because it's going to put a meme in the kid's brain that gay friendly, yeah, that's fine, but conflict him to do things that aren't historically very normal. I mean,
Well, that are not conducive of the long-term survival of the species.
No, absolutely not. Well,
yeah,
it's happening. It's happening
it is
everywhere.
happening. And I think, drawing the line between like what is legal and illegal versus what is good and not good, I think and that's where libertarians often get confused, I think.
It is, because what's legal or illegal is entirely arbitrary, especially when you look at the nature of laws being passed today. But determining what's right and wrong, good and evil, that's not something that politicians should do.
No. And I think that because libertarians are hesitant to condemn, or, they don't believe that laws should exist that condemn things, so the state shouldn't have that power. There's also this weird reluctance, I think, in them to condemn anything just as good or bad. And I think that gets them, and so I think that's why they'll be condemned to never having any real support, because I think people's nature say that there's certain things that are good, that are life supportive and, good, and things that are not.
Well, the Libertarian Party used to tout itself as being the party of principle, but I don't think it has any principles anymore at all. It's a tiny pond where people that know that they would be eaten alive and washed away in the 2 major parties have created their own little cesspool of a pond where they can be big fish and get some national. They're all narcissists, frankly. The Libertarian Party is completely worthless. I don't support it. It stands for absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I know that like Tom Woods has talked about the Mises Caucus, which, apparently is the principled arm of the Libertarian Party. But there's the rest of it, I think, is basically people, as you said, people who would not be able to get away with what they want to do in a larger party. So they just end up there.
And in the process, they give libertarians a bad name as being kooks and weirdos and untrustworthy.
Yep. Yeah, this guy also supported mask wearing and, thought the state was justified in closing down businesses for public health. I mean, this guy is, as far as I can tell, zero actual principled stand in anything, except for he's pro-immigration. He doesn't, he's pro-immigration.
Well, he's pro-open borders, so he's fine with. I'm pro-immigration too, but the problem is there's immigration and then there's getting people into the country that you have to support as wards of the state from there on. And that's the kind of immigration we have today. That's the real problem. It's not that people want to, if they want to live in America, that's great, because if they like America, that must mean they like America's traditional values, which are being washed away. But now we're actively recruiting the wrong kind of people that want to have free medical care, free food, free hotel. That's who's coming to America now. So it's all quite confusing. And as far as, Mayor Pete being married, I don't know if he's the wife or the husband in their relationship, but whichever it is, I don't think the state should have anything to do with marriage. It's a contract between 2 people. And if they want to say they're married to take advantage of certain tax advantages. Well, that's fine. It's just the legalism. But why is this being made into such a big deal, for God's sake?
That seems there's an agenda around it. I mean, the agenda that cuts to the heart of those liberal publications you're sharing early, which is an anti-human, anti-civilization bent, I think that's there.
Yeah, these people really do want to overturn the current civilization. And they think it's going to be a better world where you have a bigger government influencing more things and passing more laws. They don't realize that I don't know, am I right that it's completely hopeless at this point?
Well, it depends upon what you define it as. Do I think that the idea of America that might might be a resurgence of it? I think that idea is hopeless. I mean, it maybe after there's everything is washed away, you might be able to start over. But I think there's plenty of hope still as there always has been, on an individual basis. You and your family and the people around you, what you can do. There's still plenty that could be done in that regard.
Yeah, I'm just asking myself whether I should read publications like these. I'm searching for diamonds in a pile of dung when I read publications like this. And there are occasional diamonds. Like one other article that was in the London Review of Books that was actually quite good was a history of dueling. And from reading the article, the author doesn't really talk or attempt to investigate the right or wrong, good or evil, that duels would be legal. I mean, I don't know. I think they should be legal. If two people want to go out and shoot at each other, how is it any different from two guys getting into a mixed martial arts cage and perhaps doing grievous harm to each other? What's the difference, really?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's great. I think it would solve enormous amounts of problems if dueling existed and was, something that society valued, because there's all kinds of honor around that cascades through the whole society, which would cause people to behave better.
That's right. And of course, this review of the book, which was a pretty acceptable, reasonable review from my point of view, it's that he points out that throughout history, duels took place because somebody's honor was insulted. And what are you supposed to do? Well, of course, if you're a good Christian, you're supposed to turn the other cheek. But, well, who says that's the ideal solution to the problem? I mean, listen, I don't want to engage in a duel because I don't really want to kill somebody. Well, if I'm in a duel, I really do want to kill that other person, I guess. But yeah, I think dueling would be a good thing to bring back. It's a voluntary action between two people. Therefore, the state should have nothing to do with it. It shouldn't be outlawed.
No, it definitely shouldn't. And people, they could always not accept. If you don't accept it, then, doesn't it traditionally work where somebody says that they want to duel you, they challenge you, and you don't have to accept it. But it's
you might be accused of being a coward for not accepting it and not defending your honor. But on the other hand, if you put across a good reason why you don't want to fight this person, well, let the public draw their own conclusions. Exactly. Anyway, it's about maintaining your reputation, but your reputation is just a belief, an opinion in the minds of other people.
Right.
Do I own my reputation because it's in somebody else's mind? I mean, these are interesting philosophical problems to discuss, but I suspect that if I felt that my honor was really besmirched and I'm dealing with a bad character, yeah, let's have a duel. And you might get killed, but we all got to die sometime. So that's probably as good a way as any. Better than going out with a tube up your nose in a hospital surrounded by cold, blinking machines.
Yeah, that's for sure. And could you imagine, though, that we would live in the system we live in today, if dueling were allowed? Would Mayor Pete be in charge of the Department of Transportation? I mean, do you think he would have ascended the ladder to this stage if that system had been in place?
Well, just because you're gay doesn't mean that you're a pansy necessarily. I mean,
of course.
The Spartans were all notoriously gay. So I don't know, but I don't think that some group of people should make laws saying what other people may do or must not do.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I just mean like in a system where like individual honor really mattered, would you see this guy who basically is a really effective McKinsey consultant who doesn't really add any value to anything? Would they be able to rise through the ranks because of the honor culture cascading parts of that? I think that I associate with dueling. Maybe I'm wrong, but
I think you're right. It's that on the one hand, people would be more careful about what they say and to whom they say it because they're putting their lives on the line. But on the other hand, maybe your words would be better thought out in advance for just that reason. Yeah, so I'm all for dueling. It shouldn't be illegal.
well, when civilization falls, I think a version of it will make a comeback, no doubt.
Yeah, it'll get back to the nitty-gritty. I mean, there are a lot of good things that have been abolished in recent years that should make a comeback. And it's not like I'm saying everybody ought to, if they feel slighted, have a duel with the other person, but it's a game of poker, actually, is what it is. Who's bluffing? You know,
Yeah,
how
and it's
serious
also
are you about these things?
you also learn like how to strategically de-escalate. You know, you don't have to like not everything now is an escalation culture. You know, it's got to like any slight must be, you know, confronted head on as those, and instead of just it's like more of a dance, like you said. It's
Yeah, in other words, where you really dislike somebody and because he's saying all kinds of things that you think are lies or slanderous, this bad person can hide behind the skirts of the state. The state's going to protect him from saying these things. So or your lawyer will protect you.
exactly. Okay. Well, I think on that, Doug, I think we'll wrap it up for today. Well, thanks, Doug. We'll see you on Friday.
Okay, thanks, Matt.